Okay, hello everyone. We're back to join tech discussions, and this time I have together with me Karipekka Kaunisto, our CTO and one of our co-founders. So myself, I'm Sasa Moilanen, also one of the co-founders of Zoined and CEO, but I also have been working quite actively in the product owner role. So we have a lot of discussions and arguments with Karipekka about everything related to the product. But what we want to talk today is actually why do software companies fail in building analytics product modules? As we have together with Karipekka seen this happen quite many times, and we have both been doing this over 20 years, so we have quite a lot of experience in this topic. And we split this now in the presentation into five different areas that we will cover, and we will in more detail then go to the last one about architecture and technology choices. But let's start now first maybe with the first point, build versus buy. So this is kind of the question for software companies that when they think they need an analytics module in their software product, should they start building it from scratch? Should they buy some like a commercial product or use some open source, or what would be the solution? So maybe Karipekka, what's your take on this topic?
Well, it obviously depends a lot on what kind of resources you have available. So typically bigger enterprises have their own developers and uh, maybe some consultants to do the work. So typically they often consider doing it by themselves. And obviously it then depends a lot on the skill set of your developers that you have available for this kind of solution. And of course also what kind of product you are using as a basis for your analytical platform.
And of course, I mean, the whole architecture in this kind of solution has quite a lot of different components. So this is kind of a decision on every single one of them in a way. And we'll go further into what those components are. But what's your kind of own opinion, well, based like open source versus like a commercial software when it comes to business intelligence and data warehousing and so on?
Well, typically since open source is often developed by community, it may not have all the fancy features that especially the bigger customers need to fulfill their requirements. So in that sense, the commercial solutions typically both uh, meet better these kind of requirements, and also they have the ability to kind of develop their product based on some bigger customer requirements. So in that sense, the commercial solution might be kind of more flexible for the needs of such customers, but obviously then it also costs more money.
Yeah, I remember from our own experience that we used to try, for example, this open source ETL tool Talent, but ended up actually developing our own, if you can still remember that time.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good example of that. Typically these kind of open source or freemium model versions of commercial products that are kind of similar from customer perspective. They usually lack the more advanced features, and you will then quite soon end up in a situation where the tool is not able to meet all of your requirements.
Mm. But yeah, I guess what we can kind of concur is that it's an important decision before you start this kind of like a project to think about that uh, uh, what kind of model you go with. And I would say that in most cases, of course, uh, you should really consider also this buy option because that is definitely less risk. But obviously, if you need to have a kind of full control about everything, then you have to go with the build route in this. But yeah, if we move on to the next topic, we have the business requirements listed as one point here, and that kind of refer to two different things here in my opinion. So the actual like end customer requirements. So what I have seen often is that when software companies start building this kind of stuff, they only focus on the data that their own application generates. So quite often it's some kind of like a system of record. For example, it could be like an ERP, or in our case, we have come up with a lot of point of sale software solutions. So then typically the analytics module kind of focuses only on the data available in that application. But what we have seen is that business users don't like this kind of silos anymore. So they have to have like a data from multiple different sources included. So that is one key business requirement that sometimes is a bit forgotten in these cases. But then the other part, then I would say, is the business requirement from the kind of software company itself, that uh, they might not always kind of recognize the challenge of creating a product in this analytics area. So it's quite often these kind of business intelligence projects are done as projects for one customer. So then the whole productization is not that easy. And maybe, Karipekka, you have some comments on that.
Yeah, obviously, if you start building based solely on a single customer needs, they might be kind of like how would I say it, like very kind of specific. So oftentimes, rather than focusing from this kind of analytics perspective, they, for example, might have some operational pain in this kind of like, for example, in the point of sale system or ERP system, and they try to kind of solve that via analytics instead of like having the mindset of doing a business intelligence solution. So there are oftentimes these kind of requirements that will easily end up then dominating your solution if you don't have right set of mind there.
Mm. But yeah, we'll can discuss that still later on if needed. But to move forward, maybe the resourcing point is something that we have seen from time and time again, that uh, in software companies, the best developers are often assigned to the critical tasks related to the actual core application development, and then this kind of like a analytics product module development takes the kind of second priority, or gets like a second best resources. So I would say that that's typically quite a big challenge. And of course, you could use some external consultants, but then again, uh, there are always challenges in for them to fully understand then the kind of that specific software product and its data models and all that. But what's your take on this topic?
Yes, this is something that we see quite often that, for example, some point of sale system provider or uh, whatever system it is that is used in some operational capacity, they will then try to kind of slap in, if I use that term, the kind of reporting or analytics functionality on top of that application. And business intelligence as a domain is totally separate, both technically and also, I would say, functionally from the traditional operational application. So basically, it even starts from the data model side and how data is stored and presented, and what kind of like uh, queries you need to execute against the data. So typically, these operational systems are not suited at all for this kind of real business intelligence or analytics scenario. So you shouldn't try to slap in the BI functionality to this type of application. Rather, it needs a totally different kind of mindset how you start building such a product, and it's certainly its own challenge that requires different kind of thinking compared to building some traditional operational functionality in, for example, point of sale system.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, fully agree with that. Data quality here is maybe just mentioned as a point that whenever you have a business intelligence or analytics project, I mean, data quality tends to somehow come to focus, and there are big differences, of course, in different software systems, how they have been developed from the start. That do they allow, for example, kind of conflicts in the data, like in our case with let's say expertise dealing with point of sale systems, for example, is that there are quite various ways how also the system can be designed so that users can, for example, mess up with the data or use a lot of free text fields or whatever. But do you have any like practical examples of that?
Yeah, it's actually very common that this kind of data quality issues will pop up since business intelligence domain is such that when you really start analyzing the data, then you will definitely very quickly spot these kind of deficiencies in your data because they will obviously then complicate your analysis of the said data. So, and very often the case is that the operational system, for example, point of sale system, has not been too like careful when kind of dealing with data integrity issues, for example, like making sure that a certain process is followed when you, for example, input a new order. So certain orders might be lacking crucial information that then complicates analyzing such orders quite a bit when you get those into your BI system. And many uh, operational systems also may not have this kind of clear checks that if user does something funny there, so kind of like misuses the system, then there are not proper checks in place that prevent users from doing that. So those will then create all kinds of anomalies in your data and make the analysis quite a bit more complicated.
Mm. Yeah. And like I mentioned, the architecture and technology is actually the point that we'll be spending most of our time with, and we'll soon dig deeper into that. And that's of course derived from the actual business requirements. So to meet those different kind of business requirements, what kind of architecture choices do you have to make, and so on, and what kind of technologies to pick. But what I would like to point out that if we look at the market recently, there is starting to be like this small group of more advanced users who are demanding more and more from their analytics solutions. So I remember, let's say 25 years ago, when I first started with this domain, it was enough to just create like uh, some basic sales dashboards or sales reports. But nowadays, I mean, people do want to have like uh, alerts and automated emails going to different stakeholders with insights included in them, not just the figures. And people talk about utilizing Gen AI and causal AI even in those solutions and so on. So I guess it's inevitable now that also this field of analytics is kind of, maybe even the term business intelligence is more moving towards a term decision intelligence that I've seen being used in the last couple of years, that it's not enough anymore that you just see data, but you need to understand the why something happened, and you need to understand the what's gonna happen, like the prescriptive analytics side and or predictive analytics side, and even then the prescriptive analytics sides, like what you should then actually do to meet your goals. So if we think about what that requires, it's kind of again adding huge amount of complexity into this whole architecture and pipeline of data moving from one place to another and being transformed on the way. So maybe just to give a bit of like a idea where the world is going, I could briefly show one example. So what we see here is actually from the Zoined retail analytics tool, a more traditional dashboard view. But the point I wanted to highlight is that the very long, complicated road from, for example, let's say a point of sale solution systems database into a data warehouse and into this kind of like interactive dashboard is what this industry used to do for last, let's say, 10, 20 years. But now, as I said, basically the complexity has increased still many times with the requirement for actually being able to analyze this data through natural language querying. So either typing your questions or even asking them with voice, and even getting then answers about the why part and the predictive part and the prescriptive part. Okay, let's see if we could check with voice what is happening with our sales.
Hello, how can I assist you today?
Show me year-to-date sales grouped by month.
Show me year-to-date sales dropped by month. Sure, let me look at that data. This will just take a few moments. The total year-to-date sales amount to 2,669,110 euros.
Okay, dropping means the same as grouping nowadays, so that's very great work from
Is there
Zed.
anything else I
But
can
let's
help you
see
with?
if we could.
Thank you. How
Could
else
you
can I
add
assist you today?
comparison to previous year?
Show me
Please
year-to-date
compare with
sales
previous
compared to
year.
the previous year. Got it. I'm running the numbers now. One moment, please. The analysis is ongoing and taking a little longer. Thanks for staying with me. Year-to-date sales for 2025 about to 2,669,110 euros compared to 2,469,491 euros last year.
Okay, so why did sales year to date increase compared to previous year?
Do a root cause analysis on why year-to-date sales increased compared to the previous year. Sure, let me look at that data. This will just take a few moments. The analysis is ongoing and taking a little longer. Thanks for staying with me. The increase in year-to-date sales by 199,619 euros, representing an 8.08% rise, was mainly driven by a significant increase in the number of visitors and a higher average unit sales value.
Okay, thanks, Zed. Okay, so that was a short demo about the future of BI. So basically, getting Gen AI and causal AI working nicely together, using this kind of like a solid backend of data warehousing and query engines working fast enough to provide all those answers and so on. A funny detail is actually that there's something like 50 to 100 SQL queries happening in parallel when that causal analysis or the root cause analysis being run there by said to find out, for example, why did sales increase year to date compared to previous year in that example. So that would take a human analyst like several hours actually to run a similar exercise. But now I think it's time to actually move to this whole architecture and technology discussion. So let's see the points we want to go through there. So I think here we could start with the first point, obviously. So one of the business requirements we are hearing more and more is that the business users want to have the near real-time data in use. So um, this is actually, let's say, a very traditional mistake by a lot of software vendors, that they understand this requirement and then they try to use their operational database as the kind of reporting database at the same time to ensure that the users always get the near real-time data, but that has its issues that I think, Karipekka, you probably can comment that from your side.
Yeah, for sure. As we already kind of when I was discussing about how badly the traditional operational system will fit to this domain of doing analytics, it's part of kind of similar issues here, so that your operational database is typically optimized for serving operational needs, not serving like reporting or analytical queries. So what will easily happen is that you will face two issues. First, your analytical queries will be slow, so users will need to wait a long time for their responses, which is of course very frustrating to them. But maybe even worse thing is that your performance of your operational system will likely suffer because of the heavy query load from analytical users. So for these reasons, it's not really a good idea to try to combine your analytical query load with your operational database.
So in a way, this takes us to the need to actually have a separate data warehouse, and then you need basically the ETL or ELT processes running there. So how you move the data from the source system to the data warehouse. But can you give any insight into what makes this area actually pretty challenging, and how to really work with all this parallel processing and so on efficiently?
Yeah, so obviously, since we are discussing about this kind of very near real-time requirements, that itself obviously brings a great challenge, because the ETL pipeline that will take the data from operational system and transform it to be suitable for your analytical system will need to be very fast, obviously, because otherwise it won't be near real time. And then if you have a kind of like high volume of transactions and a lot of data, maybe even from different kind of systems that you need to all be handled by the pipeline in near real time, that will add further challenge. So the pipeline must be very efficient in processing the data and make kind of like intelligent decision on how to incrementally process data in a stream-like manner, so that you can optimize your resource usage when data moves through your pipeline to the analytics warehouse, and that will then be able to provide users at least a near real-time um, reports based on the data, how the data updates and in your operational systems.
And related to this topic, of course, we have this need for managing multiple data sources. Like I mentioned, that the business users don't like silos anymore. They want to have like in one data warehouse all the relevant stuff. So any pointers on this?
Yeah, it's a very challenging topic, because obviously uh, when you have numerous different systems where you need to get your data from, they all typically have their own kind of issues, how you are even able to integrate them with your data pipeline. So there might be various challenges with different systems. And then obviously when you start combining these data sets to your analytics to be able to kind of get the reports you need, you will face your own share of issues, like how can you combine different data sets. There will be master data issues, and won't be easy to kind of combine two totally distinct data sets for your metrics. So yeah, it requires very specific solutions how you can build metrics based on totally different data sets from different systems. But that is oftentimes very valuable, that you can combine kind of like different areas from your business. For example, your sales data and then your work hour or shift data together to get very powerful metrics out of those.
Hmm. Yeah, and then of course more and more in recent years, folks in the industry have been talking about self-service business intelligence. So uh, about the ability for business users to create their own reports and dashboards and visualize data and add and create their own metrics and share the information easily. Overall, have this kind of like a no-code intuitive user interfaces. And I would say one of the key enablers here is actually the kind of semantic metadata layer that you need to have, like the one version of truth everywhere in the organization and everything shareable within the whole system. So all the metric definitions and so on, like create metric once and it's available everywhere, not like create metric in one report and then again next day create the same metric in another report separately. So any comments, Karipekka, from your side on this whole self-service BI topic?
Yeah, obviously it's quite requires quite a bit more functionality than these traditional reporting solutions tend to be very kind of fixed. So you will have this kind of maybe a reporting section in the application where you can select from a couple of fixed reports, like you might have some sales report that is fixed. You have certain, for example, table with certain columns in it, and then you can maybe make few selections like the time range or maybe a couple of dimensions there. But other than that, it doesn't offer the flexibility to meet the more complicated requirements from the end users. So building this kind of product that actually offers a very wide range of metrics, dimensions, and the flexibility to do exactly the kind of analysis, ad hoc analysis that end users would like to do is a lot more complicated to achieve than just providing some fixed reports for them. And obviously, it will have a lot of technical issues then because you cannot know beforehand what kind of queries the end user will end up running. So users are very creative. They can come up with various kind of reporting queries that you as a developer kind of never expected them to do. So the system should be able to kind of operate efficiently even under those scenarios that end users will come up with very demanding analytics requirements. And then obviously, like, disseminating this information across your organization is crucial, that you have various means to do that, for example with email reports and sharing the reports that you have created to kind of share the information across the organization. So typically that kind of functionality is also rather lackluster in many operational systems, that you will end up digging the same information over and over again manually. So that is obviously not ideal.
Yeah. Okay, but then I guess we could move to the last 3 points in this architecture and technology area. So one is then again derived from the business requirements that people want to have high performance ad hoc query support. So when they want to drill down into some detail, they don't want to wait for a minute for the results to kind of finish, but everything needs to be like a typically working in a few hundred milliseconds and so on, so that modern people don't get too impatient. So any comments on the kind of technical challenges behind making this kind of like architecture and queries possible?
Well, yeah, that is obviously bread and butter when building this kind of solution. So it all starts with selecting a proper database product for your analytical platform, because it should be optimized heavily on this kind of complicated uh, aggregated queries that are very typical in analytical context. So instead of these operational databases, which typically are geared towards transactional data, so you will process an order and then save it to the database and update it. But here you will need to instead query over a big set of those orders and aggregate the numbers to get the results you need in your analytics and reporting. So that's a very different scenario, and the database product you choose should obviously be very, very highly optimized to the latter scenario. Yeah. And then obviously when you are building your product, you need to take great care when you design your data model in the analytical database, and also what queries are. You need to optimize the queries so that if there is even like 10% of the queries or small subset of the queries that will take a lot of time and resources to process, then obviously that will lead the entire database and your analytical system to slow down in general as well. So the optimizing your queries and constantly profiling and monitoring that everything works smoothly is a crucial thing. So you need to have a lot of expertise in understanding how such analytical queries are created and processed through your analytical engine and in your database. It's kind of expertise that many developers don't really have. And then on the other side of things, like you need to constantly be able to feed your data warehouse with new data, because if you want to achieve the near real-time analytics, then the data must be continuously flowing to your data warehouse as well, and that brings its own challenges, because in continuously ingesting a lot of data in your warehouses obviously consumes a lot of resources from your data warehousing cluster. So also that part of your solution must be optimized heavily to make sure that you, for example, process only the data that you need to insert, and not like, for example, build a data pipeline that will continuously ingest duplicate data or some unnecessary data to kind of which will take a lot of resources from your backend to process. So there are all kinds of performance issues. It won't be easy to achieve this kind of low latency, high throughput analytics platform. It requires a lot of work and constant work. It's kind of like a work that never stops. You need to be constantly monitoring and improving things to reduce the bottlenecks, especially when the
Yeah,
use.
I remember recently actually when you noticed this kind of uh, time span starting to increase in handling the data loading into the data warehouse. So I think that was quite a good example what you were just explaining. Maybe if you can tell that whole hexa comparison thing as an example for people to realize how like into weird directions these fine-tuning optimization things can go.
Yeah, so obviously one part of this kind of performance improvement is that you constantly monitor the performance and compare it to the kind of like performance levels in your history. So if you start noticing that there are like degradation of performance, then you will need to start investigating why that is. So basically, you will then typically start analyzing which queries are the ones that are causing problems in your system, and then start thinking about how to improve the process. Typically, when the use of your analytics platform increases, so will then the bottleneck queries, and if, even if everything worked smoothly before, when the usage of your platform increases, the things start to slow down and will require further tuning. So basically, there are a lot of technical means how you can optimize your queries and how you store your data. So basically, you can, for example, if I give this one practical example, that when you ingest the new data, you can, instead of like comparing individual database columns, you can compare this kind of row hashes, for example, to make it a lot more efficient to detect which rows have actually changed and which have not. So there are a lot of these kind of technical details that will improve the performance of your warehouse if you know how to apply them.
Yeah, I think that hash example went quite far already in the kind of how far it sometimes makes sense to fine tune these things. But this is of course mainly for big environments with a lot of like parallel processing. I think. What did you say? Currently, we have something like around 100,000 ETL loads running per day in our like a data warehouse cluster.
Yeah, something like 120,000 is the current daily
Mm.
figure based on our
Yeah,
internal
yeah,
analytics.
and maybe about 1 million SQL queries generated against the data warehouse every day.
Yeah, especially the
Yep.
Mondays and month changes are the times when there is a lot of activity when users are obviously keen on monthly and weekly reports. So those are the most busy times for us.
Mm. Yeah. But yeah, moving on, then again, one of these upcoming business requirements is this requirement to really start getting relevant business insight from the data, not just like visualization of data as such. And basically, now in recent years, there has been quite a lot of progress with whole generative AI based solutions. So I would say that it's good to remember that these new solutions actually do need a very robust like a data architecture in the backend. So all this stuff we have discussed so far is kind of the prerequisite that you can start really utilizing all these nice Gen AI chat interfaces and those kind of things, because the LLM still, of course, need to get access to that same data as human users do, and they need to have like a super fast query times, because people don't want to wait for a couple of minutes for a chat interface to reply to their queries, but the actual queries need to be done very fast. And like I mentioned, you have to run like tens of them in parallel to get into the performance that the user doesn't have to wait for more than 10 seconds typically to get something like a root cause analysis answer and so on. So very interesting area now with the kind of new models all the time improving, and then these kind of RAG methods improving. But it also means that again we need to kind of take a whole lot of new technology into the stack. So like vector databases and evaluation tools and directed acyclic graphs for causal analysis, and uh, machine learning models keep on developing with the predictive analytics stuff and so on. So how do you, Karipekka, handle all this stuff as a CTO? I mean, everything kind of stays from the past that you still need to understand and take into use, and all every year all kind of new stuff comes.
Well, yes, obviously it's a big challenge, and you need to constantly keep learning and improving on what you are doing. So you never stay still. You must always keep running and improving your solution to keep up with times. So obviously it's a great challenge, and you need to also be able to hire great people to help you with meeting that challenge, because obviously it's too big task to manage just by myself.
Yeah. But yeah, when it comes to architecture and technology choices, the last topic we'll discuss now today is actually related to the business requirement of having actually cost efficient deployments of analytics. So we are talking about total cost of ownership, or TCO. So how do you optimize for like the costs when it comes to development projects and user licenses and data storage and query performance and the maintenance and the technical support? And what we have noticed that there's actually also quite a lot of difference between different industries. So when you have like low margin industries where also typically there's a lot of competition and low barriers of entry to the industry, it kind of leads into industries where you are not really like in position to, let's say, start paying, for example, $20 per month for an analytics license for your every employee. And that can easily lead to then analytics being left only to the kind of couple of headquarters people. And then you lose a lot of the potential value there. So that's actually something that we deal with every day, of course, that how do we ensure like cost efficient analytics deployments for our customers. So what's your take, Karipekka, on this? What do you think is kind of the key points to consider here when it comes to total cost of ownership?
Well, obviously, it depends a lot on how many users your organization has needs to use this business intelligence functionality or analytics in general. And typically, when, as we have discussed, when the world moves on, the required user base is constantly increasing as well. So obviously, the more users, the more queries they will do, and more reports need to be produced. So that will obviously add a lot more demand on the performance side on your analytics platform, and therefore you will need to allocate more resources there as well, both like hardware infrastructure and more advanced services, and that means more developers usually as well to kind of manage the system. So all those things need to be considered. And another dimension is obviously that the more data you will have, that will directly affect on the resourcing side of things, because if you want to combine, for example, data from multiple data sources near real time, that is obviously a challenging requirement. And for bigger organizations, they typically have a lot of data, a lot of transactions and stuff going on. So combining these two aspects will define how complicated project you will have. Obviously, the third dimension will be your analytical needs. So if you have complicated requirements and for your analytics, and that will obviously then increase the cost as well.
Yeah, I think what we have discussed also in the past is that really our guiding principle here has been to, in our own solution for analytics, so this joined analytics for retail and restaurants, is that we have kept the total cost of ownership low because we have chosen open source tools where it makes sense, and then we have developed a lot of tools ourselves, like we mentioned the ELT tool and the whole like query engine, how to actually fetch the data from the data warehouse, and the actual data visualization side. We are using their commercial component, but one that is kind of not tied into the licensing, is not tied to the amount of usage and so on. So we have kind of tried to do everything we can to keep us using tools where we don't have to pay like any third-party vendors, any like a per user licenses and so on. I don't think we have any such tool in our own architecture in use at the moment, if I remember correctly. But yeah, that's one of the key considerations, how to keep the total cost of ownership down. And obviously, when you like us provide analytics as a SaaS solution, then you can basically offer it as something plug and play, ready to go. So that's of course one of our key ideas, that we can help uh, software vendors as our partners to offer this kind of solution to their end customers. Also, for example, in white label models as well, and so on. Have like a low TCO offering there, that we have done all the heavy lifting in this architecture and technology side, for example, like we now went through together with Karipekka. But this was basically the joint uh, tech discussion this time. So thank you very much, Karipekka, for your input here, and I'm sure we'll have more of these tech talks coming in the future. But now, thanks.
Thank you.